Welcome back to Digital Tutors. In this lesson, we're going to be putting together the string out. And we're going to use this new footage of this fight scene as opposed to the documentary. Now, I'm going to talk about string outs. I'm going to talk about the kind of things that you are looking for in this fight scene. And you can apply those same things to the footage from the documentary. The reason I'm giving you two different types of footage here is because when you're editing together a fiction fight scene, it's a little bit different than when you're editing together a documentary, based mainly on the fact that somebody's really planned out the fiction footage, and the documentary footage, you kind of get what you get when you get there. So let's take a look at this fight scene footage here. We can always, again, open it up and make it our icon view. The reason I open it up when I want to do an icon view is because I'm the kind of guy who sort of likes list views. It makes it much easier for me to expand and make things smaller so that on here I can just have folders instead of having a whole bunch of icons. So we can look at all of this footage here and we can see that there has definitely some thought been put into a story because you have some very specific shots going throughout. You have these long shots of the action, you have it duplicated in the medium shots. It's a lot more repetitious in the way that it was filmed, because in a fight scene that's choreographed, you have a lot more control, and so you can actually repeat the same thing. Again, here we have multiple takes of the exact same thing. So you can look at it that way and get a sense. I'm going to go ahead and do list view because when I'm doing a string out, what I like to do is look through every single shot. And I figure out if that's a take that I want and what part of that take I want, and I drop it down onto the string out. The first step is for us to make a new sequence. So I can just go up to File, New, and make a new sequence. Or again, I can do Command N or Control N if you're on a PC. Or you can also just right click here and do a new sequence. That way also works. Now this is where we pick it. I know that this is digital SLR footage 1080-24. That's totally fine. We could pick something different if we want. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and pick something wrong for now, just so that you can see it change. So you click this thing if you know what you want. Change the name to string out. In this case, I say okay, I bring it down here. Now, you could just edit this way, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but again, I like to organize stuff. So I'm going to create a new bin, and I'm going to call this sequences, or edits, or whatever makes sense to you. And I'm going to drop my string out into here, because what I like to do is called generational editing. So after I go through and I pick all the shots that I think I might want to use and drop them down onto my string out, I can duplicate by just right-clicking on this. I can duplicate and go from there. And then once you duplicate the string out, rename it and chop it, you always have that generation before. I know some editors who do a different duplication every single time they sit down to edit. So they might have one per day or a couple per day, just to make sure that if they've made any editing mistakes or they go back and decide that they don't like what they did, instead of having to recreate it, they can just step back in the generations. Okay, so we have our string out, it's ready. Remember that we set it wrong. So the first thing I'm going to do, you can double click here and you can listen through. Now this footage all has sound with it. It's not the best sound in the world. It's basically all just this lovely traffic hum because it was filmed at a park. So I'm going to probably turn off the audio. So you can just turn off the audio and make sure that it doesn't come down here. You can see that we have one video track and one audio track ready. So I'm going to turn off the audio because all I really want is the video. Now you could bring down the audio in the video and just delete all of the audio later, but why not do it now? So all we're going to do is basically look at the shot and see, okay, if we're going to use that shot, I'm going to go ahead and just put an in point by pressing I or clicking there right before this other guy walks out. Since I don't want the sound anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and mute it because it's annoying. Maybe to where he stands and looks. So I press my O, and now there's a couple different ways to bring it down there. I can just click this button, but what that's going to do is it doesn't give me the chance to change things. So instead of using that overwrite, and just in case you don't know, the difference between overwrite and the insert is the overwrite basically glues it on top of anything that you have it on. So if I put this right here and I press overwrite again, you see it glued on top and it got rid of the rest of that clip. Whereas if I pressed insert, it splits the clip right there and moves everything over. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. Now, what I'm going to do is, instead of pressing one of those buttons, is the first time I bring footage into here, I click and drag it, because then it checks my sequence settings. And so, unless you click this little always ask, let it always ask. So I just get in the habit of dragging it down there just to make sure that my edit is the same settings as my sequence, because unless I know for a fact that I want to change it, it's better just to edit natively the way that the footage was shot, because then you can always bring it in to something else and it's in the highest quality possible. So I'm going to change my sequence settings to match my clip settings. And now we know that we are editing the right way. From that point on, you can use these buttons, and if you linger over the button, it'll tell you comma or plus is insert or overwrite, and two-handed editing makes you much faster. So what I'm going to do is go through all these shots, and you're not really trying to put together a real edit. What you're trying to do is just sort of get a rough idea of what your shots are and the ones that you might want to use. So that one is out of focus until about here. So I'll do an in point there, have him pause again, and bring it down. And you just go through the whole thing and put together your little string out. If you want, you can kind of try to put it in order. Now, I've already looked through this footage, so I think I pretty much know exactly what I want. But the nice part is, even if you cut too much, it's not a big deal, because you can always just extend your edits down here, and we're going to talk about that next. So what you're really looking for when you're kind of trying to put together your string out is that visual flow, is that story, is the beginning, the middle, and the end. And thinking if you're going to do this inductively or deductively, if you have those options here. Now, the other thing that you want to keep in mind when you're cutting together a fiction scene here is overlapping action. Well, any kind of edit, actually. This is where you can start looking for that overlapping action. You never want to cut directly after or before an action. You want to cut on the action and let that action overlap, because that's what kind of hides your edit. Especially in an action scene where you're cutting a whole bunch, you want to make sure that each edit isn't visible, because A, it's not a jump cut like we talked about before, and B, because you're cutting on the action. So always look for the repeated action. So he's paying attention. Fantastic. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this shot, for example, we're looking for that overlapping action, and that's where we're going to cut. Now, in this case, I could leave the whole action, which here block, and he pushes. I could put that whole thing on there, or if I know that I'm going to try to make an edit there, then I could kind of go halfway through right now and go out from there. So again, not trying to put together the entire edit. This isn't a rough cut. You're really going through and just getting the pieces that you think you want. If you have multiple takes, you pick which take you want. If you have lots of different coverage of the same thing, you kind of take your first stab at, okay, at this point I think I'm going to be long shot. At this point I think I'm going to be medium or close up. But don't be afraid to put too much on there. Any shot that you think you might want to use, or any part of a shot that you think you might want to use, go ahead and drop it down. And that means that if you have 2 or 3 different subsections of an individual shot that you might want to use, go ahead and take them and put them down there. So go through the footage, pick the shots that you want, pick the parts of those shots that you want, drop them down into the timeline, and you can do that with the fight scene footage here, and you can also do that with the documentary footage. And then when you're ready, come on back and watch the next lesson.